Um, my name is Margaret Sheil. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of Queensland University of Technology and also the Deputy Chair of Universities Australia. And we've got the last session, but I think it promises to be a very lively and informative one. So we do have a panel, but we are going to start with Australia's the ambassador from the European Union to the EU, and left the bio in the wrong place. And so our first speaker, and he's going to give an opening address and then I'll go to the panel, is His Excellency Mr. Gabriele Visentin. He became the European Ambassador to Australia in November 22 after serving a number of diplomatic roles. And for this session in particular, he has one of his previous roles was President of the ECSC, the European Community for Steel and Coal, and advisor to the European Affairs on European Affairs to the Italian Minister for Industry, Energy and International Trade. That will be followed by our panel discussion, and their bios are in the program. So Michael Frangos from Indigenous Energy Australia. He has a Greek heritage and hails from the Sunshine Coast, is now based in Melbourne, working on a range of really interesting projects, which he's going to tell us about. Stephanie Bashir is the founder of and CEO of Nexa Advisory, and she's held a range of roles, including in a very important strategy and policy role at AGL. And Willox, who needs no introduction to this forum, he's joined us for many different capacities in the past. He's the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group. So we'll get going first with His Excellency, and then the panel will join the panel. He will join the panel for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. Oh, okay. So it goes with this. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for having cut short my career, so it shows I'm younger than what I really am. So thank you very much. It looks like, at least. Thank you all for being here. First of all, I wish to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, and recognize any other people or families with connection to the lands of the ACT and region. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be attending today's event. So it's a pleasure to be here today and to share a few thoughts on the energy state of play of Europe and the interconnection that these have with Australia. Our discussions take place today in a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape where energy security concerns, climate change concerns, and the industrial competitiveness and security of supply chains all intersect with the threats that climate change poses and how we respond to this. But I would like to touch upon what I just said with acknowledgement of the country. We are all here talking about climate change and how to face the challenges that this puts. I think that if we all had the same approach that First Nations people have since 65,000 years to the environment, we would not face the crisis where we are. The First Nations people, but correct me if I'm wrong, lesson is that the environment, the humanity, the men, don't own the environment. They have the duty to preserve it and pass it on intact to the next generations. And can we have a round of applause, please? Because this attitude would have spared the crisis situation in which we are now. But since we live in a Western, industrialized, developed world, we have come to a climate change and to a climate crisis that we have to face. And so we have to do our best on that, bearing in mind, though, that we have a moral duty to preserve what is left and to transmit it intact. So the EU. The EU is, allow me to say quite proudly, leader in trying to mitigate the effects of global change, and its energy policies mixed. So we have been addressing energy dependency and growth and developing clean energy at the same time. So in 2022, in the EU, we had fossil fuel import bill jumped to 640 billion euros, which is more than 1 trillion Australian dollars. And before then, we were still spending over $1.5 billion a day buying third countries' coal, oil, and gas. And this level of import dependency remains roughly the same today. So we had this huge increase in 2022 due to the war in Ukraine. And I will come back on this later on. So we decided already a long time ago that this kind of situation cannot stand. And we have been making good progress to address this issue in the last years. In the EU, we will continue to diversify our energy supplies and expand our clean sources of energy generation from renewables, and also, in some of our member states, from nuclear. Encouragingly, in the EU, our share of renewables in the electricity mix has increased from 36% in 2021 to 46% in 2024, driven mainly by wind and solar. And in the first half of 2024, wind and solar, for the first time, overtook power generation from fossil fuels. So for the first time ever, we are generating more from renewables than from fossil fuels. And interestingly, we note the parallels in Australia and the remarkable growth in renewables here from recent statistics, both large-scale wind and solar and small-scale photovoltaics. Across our member states, we will have to continue to invest in next-generation clean energy technologies like fusion, enhanced geothermal, and solid-state batteries. We must also mobilize more private capital to modernize our electricity grids and storage infrastructure. And we must better connect our clean and low-carbon energy systems. And here I pause to point out that the world is moving faster than ever towards clean energy. Global spending on clean energy hit a record of $3 trillion US dollars last year. And for every dollar invested in fossil fuels, $2 were invested in renewable energy. For us, decarbonization does not only deliver clean energy, good jobs and growth, it also delivers for strategic autonomy and security. And meanwhile, acting on climate energy remains imperative. In the EU, greenhouse emissions have gone down by around 40% since 1990, while the EU's GDP has risen 70%. So we are leading the way in demonstrating that it is possible to decouple economic growth and emissions. So, mind you, we have reduced emissions by 40% and enhanced our GDP by 70%. So really, we managed to decouple growth and emissions. But let me be really crystal clear in case there is any confusion. We are doubling down on climate action in the EU. We have no alternative. The emphasis for us might now pivot slightly towards competitiveness and simplification of regulation, but reducing emissions will remain an urgent priority, as it must for all other countries, also multilaterally. And let me open a parenthesis here. Investors and businesses need predictability and certainty. And this is where the policymakers have a role. And we see the value of staying on course on the Green Deal and on the green economy. You know, when the Paris Agreement was set up, it was all about ecology. Well, now, Paris Agreement is not just ecology, it's economy. And we have to understand that the green transition is an economic transition, and it will be producing benefits for the businesses which invest, which go green. So And I have to say that the green capitalism against brown capitalism is a fake fight, because green capitalism has already won. We will be green, maybe at slower pace than we thought, but we will go green. Green is the future, brown is the past. The real point at stake for us, regulators, is to shift to a green capitalism without killing the brown capitalism in a way that would hurt us all, that would kill our wealth and our welfare. So we have to be very conscious of the risk that killing brown economy would have on the overall economic development of our society. So, but there's no doubt we will be green. And on this, I would like to refer to a very interesting document which was issued 10 days ago by JP Morgan, one of the major banks in the world. Actually, JP Morgan issued an advice to its customers saying that the ones who don't have a green part in their investment would have a competitive disadvantage in the next years. So even one of the major banks in the world, one of the major investors in the world, invite their customers to go green. And that tells a lot about what I just mentioned, that the green capitalism has already won in the longer run. So I can talk about maybe some sources of energy which could be of interest to you. So hydrogen, for example, in the EU we now have a system for supporting hydrogen production, recognizing the realities with nascent technologies and markets, but we acknowledge that there is a gap between what suppliers can make it for and what producers can pay. So essentially, then we run a competitive process through our newly established hydrogen bank, where we, as the EU institution, EU budget, pay the difference to the least cost producers with money sourced from the emission trading scheme. And importantly, we will soon develop an international pillar of this hydrogen bank. So, how can I say, stay tuned, you Australian producers of hydrogen, because that will be open to external producers as well. So as I said already, decarbonization, competitiveness, energy prices, and supply chains are all interrelated. And we are talking about green economy and green capitalism. So we are therefore going to continue to refine our policy mix in these areas. And we'll be, this week, unveiling a new clean industrial deal to further reduce our emissions and bring energy prices down, enhance our competitiveness, and create quality jobs. So it will be a new policy which will be issued by the European Commission still this week. So this strategy will focus on investments in clean energy that pays back, and by spending strategically in the short term, and we will save expenses in the long term for both citizens, households, and businesses. So without also secure access to critical and strategic minerals, we won't be able to secure an energy transition. So the EU and Australia are well on the road to deepening their cooperation in this domain as well. We have signed a landmark broad memorandum of understanding on a strategic partnership on critical raw materials last year. And we also have reached a roadmap with some already flagship projects ongoing. So we are really looking forward at this as enhancing our strategic relationship on this. And I want now to mention something which is really bringing some bad vibes and really a stark mode on us all. It's the Ukraine, the aggression, the war of aggression against Ukraine. And this week marks the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the war has had a crucial role in shaping EU's approach to energy in the last 3 years. So before the start of the war, Europe got 45% of its gas and 50% of its coal and much of its oil from Russia. This energy appeared cheap, but it exposed us to blackmail and showed us that we have to diversify our supply chains. So we had to rapidly reduce our dependency on Russian fossil fuel and impose very heavy sanctions on Russia. And on this, I have to thank Australia, because Australia has followed the EU's approach on this from the very first day of the war. But freedom from Russian energy sources came at a price. Households and businesses saw sky-high energy costs, and for many are yet to come down. So this is an example on our competitiveness depends on getting back to low and stable energy prices. So clean energy is ultimately the answer, because it is cheap, it creates good jobs, and strengthens EU energy independence. And also, if there has been a positive consequence of the war of aggression against Ukraine, is precisely this. It has made us understand that we had to diversify supply chain, but we had to diversify the energy mix and go greener and greener. But also, this is price-induced, but still it's a very good result. Our consumers in the EU changed their behavior. So in the EU now, we consume 20% less of gas. So the consumption of gas has gone down by 20% in 2 years, 3 years. So I would just like to probably mention the fact that increased renewables and energy security requires new technologies, requires innovation and investment in research and development. So if the EU was able to deploy such a powerful and effective mix of policies to address climate change and go green, it's also due to the fact that the EU funds research through the biggest publicly funded research program. It's called Horizon Europe, and it's endowed with around 160 billion Australian dollars. So it's a program that supports scientific research and innovation across various disciplines, and it fosters partnerships between universities, research institutions, businesses, governments, and let's say build the necessary knowledge exchange and innovation to tackle the biggest challenges of our time worldwide. So I think that I won't bore you for long. I will go to a close. So of course we have to. I'm looking forward to the chat, but of course we have to intensify our efforts to decarbonize our energy system and help others where we can. We have no alternative. So we can do this cooperating bilaterally. We said it already. We can share best practices. We can have strategic partnership between the EU and Australia. But what is even more important is to bear in mind that global challenges need global solutions. We cannot change the world, just the two of us. We can maybe a little bit, but not very, very completely. And this leads me to the key point with which I want to end my intervention today. The importance of the multilateral system. The importance of cooperating on a world scale to address global change, to address the production of clean energy. So the Paris Agreement is vital. It has to be kept alive, and it has to continue to deliver. And the cooperation between the EU member states and Australia in multilateral fora, in the Paris Agreement, in COP, is essential. Maybe you were not happy, as we were not completely happy, with the results of the last COP in Baku. But mind you, you can always see the glass half full, half empty. I see it half full. So the results of Baku, I consider it as a building block for the next COPs. And we could achieve a good result due to the fantastic cooperation that we have between the EU, Japan, UK, US then, and Australia. Australia was instrumental to what can be seen as a success of the Baku COP. And this is the quintessential adamant evidence of the fact that we need to cooperate in multilateral fora, that multilateralism is the answer to global challenges. And we have seen that the Trump 2 administration has withdrawn from Paris, as it had done in its first term. Trump 1 also withdrew from Paris. But Paris remained alive. US was not followed by any other in withdrawing from Paris under Trump 1. So we don't only have to hope that it doesn't, the same happens now, no other countries follow Trump, because hope is, in my view, is a negative concept if it's not coupled with action. We can hope, but we can have to act for our hopes to be real. So what we have to do is that we have to ensure that no others follow the United States in withdrawing from Paris. And I'm really sure that with the kind of like-mindedness that we have, the kind of same understanding that we have on the global challenges, this will be achieved. So thank you very much for your attention, and with a word of hope, but coupled with positive actions, I'll let you and we will enjoy the talks. Thank you.
So thank you very much for that. And you touched on Horizon Europe, and the scientist and researcher in me probably just wants to expand on that a little bit. So, and with some hope and plea, I guess, that after this election, that we have another opportunity to engage with the EU about potential Australian entry into Horizon Europe. UK, Canada, New Zealand, even Montenegro for the great Gatsby fans out there, and many other countries with fewer resources than Australia are partners in this program. It's an extraordinary program. And just, look on the website, so many interesting and important collaborations that Australia could be part of. And so, given we're short of time, I won't labour that point, but it's a really, I think, important strategic question for the next government to consider, particularly in the light of what's happening in the US and how that's going to impact on research around the world. So I know my panel's really dying to get into this very lively debate that we started upstairs. So I'm going to go to you first, Michael, and I'm going to go ask, with the proposition of this session is that Australia's path to becoming an energy superpower. And so my question is, what do you think, is that real and a realistic option, and what's the biggest barrier and what's the biggest opportunity in your view?
Thanks for that. I won't touch the controversial topic we discussed before, but I'll go for the easy ones. I think it's definitely, it's a no-brainer that we could become a superpower. Go outside, look at all the sun, look at all the wind. That's anecdotal, but there's science behind it as well. We have a comparative advantage. I think the low-hanging fruit really opportunities are our two biggest exports. The second biggest export I only became aware of a couple of hours ago. The largest export is mining, or what we dig out and ship off. So I think there's huge opportunity with critical minerals, particularly with the deposits we have and the co-location with the best solar resource in the world, particularly up, through the Pilbara WA area. So there's huge opportunity there. The big challenge, I guess, to critical minerals and whether we capitalise it or not is probably not political, because there seems to be some degree of bipartisanship. But one, investment, as with lots of infrastructure and new industries, we struggle to get investment into it. And sometimes regulators, politicians, got to get out of the way and let that happen. But I think the biggest thing is where we set the needle or the pin on how processed those minerals become, because our current extractive industry is not as sophisticated, and we don't process materials as much as we could. But I think there's significant opportunity to put that pin further in terms of the processing and obviously value add, and then we ship things that have a higher per unit cost, which is great. And I think the second thing, that one's kind of straightforward. People talk about it all the time. I think the second one's something that I'm interested in, particularly in this setting. It's fitting. Second largest export in Australia apparently is international students, or knowledge getting exported to international students. So I think the knowledge economy, green professionals and exporting that knowledge and know-how experiences is a really big opportunity, particularly given our comparative advantage. So if we can develop a domestic industry that understands, say, solar, wind, batteries, transmission, distribution, energy efficiency, demand side, vehicle to grid, that type of thing. There's a whole heap of skills there that we can then become a bit of a knowledge superpower, which is something that I think we've lacked. They talk about the brain drain and entrepreneurs getting sucked over to America or elsewhere. I think there's a really big opportunity for us to get at that. But I think the biggest barrier to seizing that opportunity and becoming an energy knowledge superpower is the political will and really getting on with it domestically and figuring out, all right, this is our new economy, this is our green economy, this is what green capitalism looks like. Borrow from that kind of idea of custodianship that Indigenous brothers and sisters have practiced for 65,000 years and weave that with this emerging contemporary industry, and it's a pretty significant opportunity. And I'm going to be very self-promoting and say the last and probably the biggest, I guess, challenge, and it kind of ties into that domestic issue and drives maybe some of the political barriers that exist, is social license. That's obviously what we work on at Indigenous Energy Australia, but it's a significant issue for transmission lines and solar and wind and the rest of it. So I can imagine that if we really got to put our foot on the accelerator like we do, if we want to take a science-based approach to decarbonisation or seize that opportunity of becoming a superpower, we have to address social licence and bring community and the people along for the ride.
Thank you. Stephanie, how do you think we're placed in terms of barriers and opportunities?
Yeah. I see Australia as already an energy superpower. We already export a significant amount of energy globally. The question is, can we be a clean energy superpower? We are in a climate crisis, as we heard in the speech from the ambassador. We are also actually in an energy crisis in Australia. Our coal power stations are aging. We have to replace 60% of our generation from these coal assets over the next decade. And so really there is a huge opportunity for Australia to utilise its significant position in natural resources, whether it's wind, sun, critical minerals, resources. When I look at innovation, it was here in Australia, the first solar panel came out. UNSW basically is where the solar panel that now covers the rooftops of Australian homes and businesses. It came out of Australia. So I see we are so good at innovation, what we actually need. So one of the biggest challenges for us then to basically grasp those opportunities is the political will. Energy is highly politicized. There is no shortage of investors interested in renewable projects, renewable investments, green energy. It is really about the political certainty that will allow us to move forward. The problem around the political certainty is, we leave ourselves to a point where power becomes unreliable, and this is where we are right now in Australia. Our energy system is unreliable. We are looking at extending aged assets to keep the lights on. We are looking at gas terminals in Victoria to bring in if you like, the insurance. But it's not because renewables can't do the job. It's really about making sure that we are allowing and enabling that industry to grow and flourish, because it actually is there and is available. And we can grow it to a point where we are exporting clean energy, but we do need that political will and political certainty to be able to get to that goal.
Okay, I'll come back to both those themes, but I'll go to Ines now to just give me your brief idea of the opportunities. Can Australia be the global superpower in energy, and what are the barriers?
Thanks, Margaret, and hi everyone. Hope you're all well. Thanks for sticking it out today. You get the gold star. I'm the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group, not the American insurance company, so you're aware. Look, I think we need to sort of stop having the conversation about if or when can we be an energy superpower. We are an energy superpower. We are an energy superpower in many different ways, through many different technologies. You think of it this way. If it were not for Australia, the lights would not be on tonight in Tokyo or Seoul. It's a cold, hard fact. We export an enormous amount of energy, as Stephanie alluded to, right around the world. That is everything from coal, gas in particular, but we also have the potential to become an energy superpower in clean energy. We are abundant, as Michael has alluded to, in sun and in wind, in wave, should we choose to go down that path. Hydrogen is an option if hydrogen develops as a fully commercial proposition. We have all of this at our fingertips at the moment. Perhaps our biggest problem is that we're overwhelmed by choice in Australia. We do not have, until very recently, as Stephanie alluded to, a crisis within our own energy framework. We had abundant coal and abundant gas, and that sustained us. What we then didn't have is the investment in either that technology or new technologies. And the businesses I represent come from right across the economy. What are they focused on? They've got three big challenges at the moment. The challenges of decarbonisation, of digitalisation, which is what you've undoubtedly been talking about yesterday and today as well, and diversification, searching for new markets at a time of great turbulence, economic uncertainty, uncertainty within our trading system and the like. But you go back to the first one. Businesses already well down the path towards decarbonisation. Business has led the debate in Australia. We've had a lot of conversation here about political will and political uncertainty. As best as it could, business has been able to sort of clamber over the top of that over the past 20 or so years and go down that path of decarbonisation. But it will only get there in the end if we collectively, as a country, decide to make it easy. So what trips us up? What trips us up are things like over-regulation, a poor investment incentive climate, planning approvals, desperately difficult. We're finding this now as we go through the renewables rollout in the country. Huge problems, social licence around the rollout of transmission. The fact that we are not great at building things, construction times, construction cost are enormous compared to our international competitors. All of this tax regime, I could go on, all of this collectively makes it difficult, more difficult than it needs to be for us to push forward. Of course, we also get tripped up by our triple level of government, federal, state and local. You see that all the time, different priorities, different perspectives. They're the things that are slowing us down within the country. What business wants at the end of the day is affordable, reliable power. I say this all the time. Business is really, quite frankly, agnostic about where that power comes from. And but they just need that power, that energy to allow them to produce, to grow, to innovate, and to prosper. The big situation that we're facing within the country now, and this is where Universities Australia comes in, is a massive skills and labour shortage. You would have heard earlier or yesterday around the issues around defence. Defence, national security is sucking up an enormous amount of resources. We have that across different component parts of our economy which are growing. Defence, national security, aged care, care sector, etc., all wanting labour and resources. The clean energy transition is no different. We are short every year by about 11,000 engineers in this country. We're not going to build what we need to build unless we produce what we need to build. So my big bugbear, which is related to this, is I think Catherine Livingstone referred to it as a cottage industry, is careers counselling. It is a national disgrace, careers counselling, because it is sending kids down the wrong path, down dead-end streets and cul-de-sacs to where there are no jobs, or there are very few jobs. It's not sending them to where the jobs are, where the jobs are growing, and where the jobs will be. And if the university sector can find a way to integrate with the vet sector, but also particularly with the secondary school system, to help get our workforce of the future on the right path, that will take us a long way towards resolving some of those issues that I mentioned, but particularly those around skills and labour. Now, what everyone is not talking about was the big conversation. I'm going to throw back to you in a second, Margaret, that we had in the back room about nuclear, and I'm handing it back to you, Margaret.
I was wondering whether we should touch on this, but it is the last session. We do need to keep you here for the last 18 minutes. And that started, the conversation around skills led us into the question of nuclear, in particular, whether we have the skills or have any capacity to even create those skills and the workforce that we need if we were to go down that path. So I guess, do you want to continue with that on that theme and see where it sits from your point of view?
Well, it is the elephant in the room when it comes to our energy future. It'll be a centrepiece of this next election. How people vote. But I think from our perspective, it's good that we're having the conversation. However, it's resolved. It's important that or else it will just fester on and sort of come up every decade or so. So this will probably be the definitive conversation. But there is still a long way to go. What nuclear essentially is a 2040 solution to a 2025 problem, the type of problem that Stephanie mentioned. Our existing energy resource, our energy infrastructure is collapsing around us. We're not getting the new build as quick as we want to have it. We're not getting the rollout, although it's occurring, as fast as we want to have it. So nuclear is a conversation piece. The fact is, at the moment, it is costly, non-economic. In the Australian context, the technology around small modular reactors has not yet been developed that would allow it to roll out. We don't have the skills base, as we were talking about upstairs. We have hardly anyone who can teach nuclear physics in Australia. Go back to the defence conversation you had. You have to have 10 people with nuclear skills capabilities on each of the submarines we're going to have. We don't have 10 people in the country with those skills, quite frankly, at the moment. It has got a long way to go. Then you have the social licence to operate, and then you have construction cost. If you think it's hard to build a renewable power line, imagine how hard it's going to be to build a nuclear reactor in Australia. So all of these problems would have to be worked through, but it is sort of churns away in the background as if you want a clean energy solution, as the way to go forward. But you've got to look, it's not going to solve the 2025 problem. The 2025 problem is that all estimates are that in 2027, 2028, we're going to hit a brick wall when it comes to energy production, and the vector between production and need is going to cross over, and that's when we're going to have real problems in some of the jurisdictions in our country. That will possibly speed up the conversation around nuclear if, unfortunately, that happens, but it's more likely to happen than not at the moment. So I think that's sort of looking within the context of this discussion. If we were to develop a nuclear industry, where do we get the skills and who teaches and who wants to learn it and under what circumstances? I'll leave it there.
Your Excellency, do you want to say...
Gabriele,
yeah, Gabriele, sorry. What's Europe doing with nuclear? Where's it heading, do you think?
Well, we have to understand where Europe comes from.
Yeah.
So when Europe was set up, let's say the economic European community set up in 57, well, it was set up together with the Euratom, which was the European Community for Civil Nuclear Energy. This means that the EU has been using nuclear energy for civilian purpose since 70 years. We have 101 reactors in Europe which are active, and nuclear gives something like around 25% of the total energy production in Europe. Our energy taxonomy qualifies nuclear as not renewable, but as climate neutral form of energy. So we come from, how can I say, our 2025 problem has different, the equation is different than the one that has variables which are different from the ones of Australia. So I would not, how can I say, be able to translate the European lessons to Australia as such. We come from an energy
Different
mix
place.
which dates back 70 years ago. We have a lot of very good nuclear engineers. We have at least 3 to 4 very, very good companies which do produce nuclear plants. Yeah, but we consider nuclear for the European environment as the necessary bridge toward net zero. In Europe, we could not do without nuclear to have net zero by 2050. We have to. But again, we are not Australia. We don't have the wind, we don't have the sun, we don't have the sea that you do have. So we have, again, I don't want to take one side, a positive or an adverse side to it. I just want to state that the factual situations are very different from each other.
Yeah.
But that's But we don't. How to say? We don't have an ideological view towards nuclear. We have a very factual way of assessing it, and obviously, nuclear energy is the most expensive form of energy to set up. Even if you have the expertise, it's very, very expensive. Maybe it's not so expensive to run once it's set up, but to set it up, it's very expensive. And by the way, in Europe we do import Australian uranium. That's it.
So I might just add a couple of things. I think nuclear for Australia is a huge distraction in where we are right now in our energy transition. If we are serious about becoming a clean energy superpower, nuclear should not really be part of the discussion right now. And to be honest, we're really not even having an adult conversation on where is a place for SMRs or the nuclear that is going to be part of the future solution. But for now, Australia really is all a political debate, a political distraction ahead of the next election, which I think the next election is absolutely a sliding moment for Australia. We do have a huge crisis at hand. It's a climate crisis, and I continue to say we do have an energy crisis because of the lack of political leadership and action that we have had over the last decade. The current government has put in place certain mechanisms. We've got the renewable energy target by 2030. We've got the emissions target. We continue to support the Paris Agreement. But all our plans don't even meet the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement. All our plans that AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, is really at best at 1.8 degrees. So, we've got to get really serious about seeing, taking the science seriously and not turning it into a political debate. Australia as well, while we have all the natural resources and we export a lot of our critical minerals and natural resources, we can't really just be thinking in that line and stopping there. You know, that will only last for so long. We need to remain competitive in that space. And at the moment, you know, decarbonisation is a global agenda. Where are we at on that global agenda? I can tell you we're not in the top. You know, we are way behind the 8 ball where we need to be. And every 3-year cycle, when we have an election at the federal level, it's 1 step forward, 10 steps back. And so, you know, the state of play, if I could just continue and just talk about the state of play that we are in right now, we have, as I mentioned, 60% of our coal fleet that's old. We've got a lot of power outages at the coal fleet. We've been doing a lot of research and analysis in that space. You know, that really needs to be replaced over the next decade. Renewables is the technology right now that's available. It's cheap. And, you know, we don't really, it's all natural resource. The wind is there, the sun is there. We do need to invest in innovation in energy storage. And I think this is where really the role of governments needs to come in and not intervene in investment with knee-jerk reactions, but really to basically promote R&D in the technologies that are going to be needed to firm renewables. You know, one of the things that we found is the cost of delays is already hitting power bills in Australia. You know, the transmission cost build-out, and I know there's been a lot of news coverage and media on the cost blowouts of our transmission lines, but we've got to really remember and put things in perspective. We've got currently the East Coast transmission line, which is 40,000 kilometres, has served us very well, which revolves around our power stations. But the wind and solar, where the wind is, we need new lines. And so that means we're going to need to invest in that grid and make it happen fast. But the cost of inaction is actually a lot worse, as we've done in our research and modelling, on power bills than actually paying up the cost to get the transition done. And the key thing will be to get the transition done on time, and we're lagging behind.
Okay. You remind me of, I think it was last year, Alan Finkel was here and he talked about the banana principle, which is build anything nowhere near anything else. And that's part of a social licence issue. And it's an area where Michael's been working, I think, with various communities and organisations to how we can bring people along. And just before that, I think, you know, when we talk about nuclear, it's carbon dioxide free once it's up and running, but there's a big waste issue around nuclear that hasn't really had a serious discussion more recently, but it's been an ongoing discussion for ANSTO and the low-level nuclear reactor we have there. But Michael, I'll ask you to talk a little bit about the kind of work you do, and also this, I guess, the social inequities around the energy transition, or the potential social inequities there.
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest challenge, it can be a confronting statement, but maybe the biggest challenge is if we become an energy superpower and Aboriginal people still die 8.5 years younger than the rest of us, what was the point? So that's a real number. Cold hard fact is about as cold and hard as they come, and that's just something that still exists, that there's a portion of people that live 8.5 years less as long as us. And I have friends now and peers and colleagues that just because the colour of our skin means that they've got a different life expectancy to me, which is pretty nuts and pretty shameful. I think the opportunity that's presented gives us a lot of impact, a lot of opportunity to impact those things, and that's our approach to address some of those inequities with this huge multi-generational opportunity. And I'll kind of draw back to what His Excellency was talking about at the beginning, which was very heartening to hear that tie point to the fact that if we had maybe woven knowledge sets rather than just picked one, we probably would have been in a better place with climate change. And our approach at my organisation, we do this across the country, is take a generational view on infrastructure. So infrastructure is innately generational. It sits in the ground for generations, but often we don't think long term, or we don't plan it generationally and say, well, what is the actual benefit and how's it going to benefit us for generations? And I think climate change and our chasing our tails to decarbonise is a really good example of our, I guess, lack of foresight and lack of long-term thinking when we're developing infrastructure. But it's an issue across infrastructure, but quite pertinent in the renewable energy space. And thinking generationally, again, I take it back to Indigenous wisdom, is a innately Indigenous way to do things. Another group of people that do it well are farmers, thinking about my kids and my grandkids and making those decisions, sometimes making sacrifices for those future generations. But it's also the best practice way. So I'm an electrical engineer. I was one of the first cohorts through to get a sustainable energy systems engineering degree. So Griffith and ANU were the first cohorts through. So that I guess new generation of engineers, and there was no jobs when I graduated. There was 2 of us that went into the industry, and the rest of us didn't. So really thinking about that long-term generational outcome, I think, is the way that an engineer thinks about infrastructure. And a catchphrase that we always use is outcome over asset. So if you think about inequities, call the life expectancy, call it that only 34% of Aboriginal children start school developmentally on track. All of those things are connected to infrastructure, energy infrastructure in particular. And the why, or why we actually do infrastructure, is really to enable people's lives and support social function. It's literally the physical foundations of society. And I think that we never really clued on to that, whether it's old energy, new energy, whether it's water, telecommunications, whatever it be, we've never really got a pragmatic latch on to what's the why. If you do your 5 whys analysis, your root cause analysis, or your really sharp engineering problem-solving tools, what's the outcome we're trying to achieve? And it's not actually trying to just put stuff in the ground or turn over $1. It's actually to support people's life, and it seems very warm and fuzzy. But I think we really need a shift in the way that we think to, sure, let's become a renewable energy superpower, but let's consider how we benefit people's lives, because that's the ultimate goal, lifting, improving livelihoods. And with the cost of living pressures and the way that we're seeing the first generation ever that's worse off than their parents, it's really kind of time to act. And that's not to mention the overlap of the renewable energy industry and the Aboriginal estate. So 43% of renewable energy infrastructure will be on Aboriginal land. I think 54 to 58% of critical minerals will be on Aboriginal land. The current protections, native title, don't do it justice. I think it's in until 2018. This is a 2018 paper. The native title determinations, they went to the native title tribunal. Once you have 6 months of negotiation, it goes to a native title tribunal. They decided three times for the Aboriginal communities and 111 times for the proponents. So that land rights instrument is not fit for purpose. So I think that's the approach that we take, that generational thinking. What's the why? Where are we actually doing infrastructure? And let's embed that in the way that we plan it, we design it, we talk about it politically, and then we operate it and maintain it.
Okay, thank you. I'm actually just about out of time, and I didn't get any questions through. So I just wanted to draw a couple of points in to close. I'm old enough to actually remember fighting with my brother for a kerosene lamp in the centre of Sydney when New South Wales had a series of blackouts because of power, the coal-powered fire station challenges, and we were trying to imagine doing your homework on a piece of paper with a kerosene lamp. But I can actually remember that. But more seriously, we know that if we have power challenges, that has health impacts on those that and with with increased energy prices of people who don't either have the heating or the cooling that they need. Look. And the last point, and anybody that knows me would be not surprised that I would say this, the research on photovoltaics that came out of New South Wales University of New South Wales was supported by at least 20 years of continuous research funding from the Australian Research Council. We've seen that decline. We've heard about that in other sessions. there is a big opportunity, I think, to collaborate with Europe on many of these research questions. Enormous interest there. There's enormous interest in Japan whenever we visit Japan and Korea about how they could collaborate with us, not just on energy and extractive minerals, but in creating the research capacity and the workforces that we all need for the future. So, big opportunity here. Thank you all for my panel. Will you join me in thanking them all?
Thank you.
We could have had a more nuclear debate or a more explosive debate, but I think you heard many of the challenges that we're facing, but also that we do have enormous opportunity, and at the heart of those opportunities will also be the skills and the education we can provide as universities. And I finished right on time, and I think that means that someone's going to come and wrap up the conference. And thank you all for your time, and thank you all for staying towards the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.